Hi everyone. So last week, you guys finished your annotated bibliographies, and we also talked about using sources within your writing. And what I mean by that is we talked about paraphrasing and quote integration. And that is going to lead into your next essay, the final essay before you write your final research argument. And this essay, it's labeled as multiple perspectives essay, but I'm going to relabel it as source synthesis because essentially that is what you're going to write for this, your second to last essay. And a source synthesis, well, what is that? Well, we we synthesize information every day in our regular lives because we gather information and we process it to form our own conclusions. So I like Jane Austen novels, right? I've read books by her. I've read books about her. I've read articles about her. So I have all of that pre-existing material. I also know that I like movies about Jane Austen, and I know that I like adaptations of her novels that have been made into movies. So the conclusion I can reach based on all of my information that I have gathered through my extensive Jane Austen love affair is that I will probably enjoy the new adaptation of Emma that is out in theaters. That's kind of sort of what I mean by synthesizing, but it's also reading various materials on different issues and being able to formulate or draw conclusions between the various different things that you encounter, or making connections between one subject matter to the next. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. But outside of real life, in the writing world, a synthesis is a written discussion that draws on one or more sources. And in the synthesis, you are going to use skills that you've developed in this class, like summary, response, paraphrasing, direct quotations, and analysis, and putting together something that will help you for your larger research paper. And the purpose of a source synthesis is to really use the information from multiple sources using information from multiple sources addressing the same issue to argue your own viewpoint. So you're taking all of this information that you've gathered from your annotated bibliographies, and you're finding commonalities between those sources in order to draw your own conclusions to suit your own argumentative viewpoint. Why do we do that? Well, one of the reasons why we synthesize information is to figure out how you can use your sources to best support you and what you wish to argue, because 9 times out of 10 your sources are not going to say the same things that you say. Otherwise, it's not new, it's not original, it's not you. But it's also important because it helps you understand not only what the source says, but how those sources are linked to other sources to help further your own position. Well, how do we do that? Well, one way we do that is to look for how the author's views relate. Who of your authors agree with or disagree on a controversial issue? And if they all agree on the same issue, what information have they gathered or retrieved to reach a same or different conclusion? And finally, you also comment on the information that you've gathered and provide your own conclusions to clarify your own position. And I'll elaborate on this in a second. So where do I start? Well, the first thing that you want to do when you're preparing to write your synthesis is to identify the ideas discussed by each author. And essentially, they're all going to circle around the same topic, but what specifically are the ideas that they discuss? What is the thesis that each writer develops? What is their position on that controversial issue? And then you want to look at the supporting ideas discussed by the writer. What are the various points that each author makes in their argument, and what types of support or evidence do they use to make that point? All of that is really important because those are the things that you are going to synthesize and compare in your paper. So preparing to write your synthesis, you want to look for relationships among those ideas. So, for example, if all of my sources are on gun control, one of the things that I can guarantee is that every single one of those sources, whatever their viewpoint on the gun control is that they are probably always going to bring up the Second Amendment. So one of the points that I can synthesize is to look at how the writers used or interpret the Second Amendment in their arguments. So what are the authors saying about the Second Amendment in terms of their argument on gun control? However, sometimes it's not so easy to identify those points of commonality. So in order to find the relationship, I have some relationship questions for you to ask when looking at your sources. For example, do one writer's ideas support another writer's ideas? If so, how? Do the writers who reach the same conclusion use the same ideas in their writing, or do they use different ideas to reach the same conclusion? Do the writers who disagree discuss similar points, or do they discuss completely different points? Are any of the ideas you have listed actually the same idea in different words? So look for those relationship patterns. Look at if they look at cause and effect. Look at how they present a problem. What do they do as by way of solution? And really look at what they are all saying in regards to that one individual topic. So then you can kind of organize your thesis in a point-to-point comparison. So when you compare and contrast things, there are two ways to go about it, and I have some notes on Canvas on point-to-point comparison structure that please go through and look at. But when you do point-to-point comparison, you don't look at the sources individually, but you look at, like, for example, you don't have one paragraph dedicated to one source, one paragraph dedicated to another source, another to another source. No, you did that in your annotated bibliography. Okay, this is where you're taking all of those sources and you're finding ways to organize them based on the information that they present, or organize them by various points that they make within points of commonality or points of contrast even. So see those notes. I'll show you in a minute more on point-to-point contrast. So when you're organizing your synthesis, you want to find three or four points that some of the articles have in common, even if they disagree about those points. So for example, if I'm writing on childhood obesity and its relationship to SNAP, right? One of the things I can be certain is that they're all going to discuss the cause of childhood obesity. Another thing that they could talk about is school lunches or the nutrition that's provided in those foods that are provided by SNAP. So nutrition, activity levels, offered solutions, all of those things that all of the key elements or key points that each of these articles are going to make. I'm going to organize my essay around those, and in turn look at how my sources interpret or present that information. So what do each of my sources say about the cause of childhood obesity? What do each of my sources say about the nutrition of school lunches? What do each of my sources say about the decline in activity level? And what do each of my sources say about finding some sort of solution to childhood obesity? So once you've, once you've kind of figured out your points, then you can do an outline of your paper. And I've provided this outline on Canvas, but this is what basically point-to-point contrast structure looks like. So you're going to have your introduction, and then each of your body paragraphs is going to discuss one point discussed by two or more of the articles. So how is that point presented in Article 1? How is that point presented in Article 2? How is that point presented in Article 3? So you're dealing with 5 sources here. So, and maybe one of them doesn't apply because it's dealing more with background information. But you're dealing with 5 sources. So they may not all talk about this issue, but find commonalities in at least 2 or 3 for each of these sources. So after you've done your discussion of how that point is addressed in each of your articles, you can then draw your own conclusions about what you feel or what's your position or argument based on that point. Then you can move on to another point discussed by 2 or more of the articles and how it's presented in those articles, and then another point. So have at least 3 good points that each of your articles address, or maybe an optional paragraph mentioning one more major point of contention, or one major point that's discussed in one of the other articles, and then you have a conclusion. So really briefly, with an introduction to this essay, you want to begin with establishing the context of your debate or the controversy in regards to your issue. And then establish a thesis with a framework for the various points or sources addressed, or outline the points of commonality explored in the essay. So I know that I've harped and harped about why the list thesis is not a good idea, but for this particular essay, the list thesis is appropriate, so feel free to use the list thesis. Each body paragraph, you should choose a point of commonality or contention, which will be your topic sentence, and then for your illustration, you'll present various positions or assertions from your experts. For example, Professor of Law disagrees, his thought is echoed by Professor Rum of University, authors F and S also discuss and assess. So really look at how the conversation that each of your sources have with one another. Because that's how you're going to synthesize the information, because it's not just presenting one person's point. You're looking at a variety of people's points and how those relate to you. So, and then finally you have an explanation where you can conclude the discussion that you've established in your illustration section by finalizing your point on, or your position on the point. So if I'm talking about the impact on social media on the academic performance of tertiary students, it's been well researched. Although some research findings outline social media and emotional benefits of using social media for learning, a number of studies demonstrate a correlation between students' use of social media and poor academic achievement. And then I have my examples, and then after I have my examples, I can make my own conclusion. The recent studies have begun to provide insight into how social media may negatively affect the academic performance of tertiary students. So take a look at this, but this is an example of what those types of paragraphs should look like. I make a point, I discuss how they talk to one another, and then I have my conclusions that I'm making. And then finally, after you do that for each of your 3 points, you're going to come up with a conclusion where you restate the controversy and analyze what the sources say to establish the thesis you intend to make or intend to use for your larger essay. So that, ladies and gentlemen, in a nutshell, is the synthesis essay. And all of the information that you present in your source synthesis essay can then, of course, be carried into your final paper. So, and I would suggest, even if you don't use all 5 of your sources, at least try to use 4 of them. So I'm going to leave it here, and please email me if you have any questions or concerns about the synthesis essay. Wait, I forgot, I have one more thing. I want to explain the assignment that you'll see here in Canvas. Your assignment is to write a source synthesis on the sources used in your annotated bibliography, where you show the conversation between your sources and add your voice to that conversation. Establish your own argument at the end of the essay. So it should be 3 to 4 pages, and please put it in MLA format. And as always, let me know if you have any questions.